Yeah, I think we're on. Well, greetings, all of you who are students in Christianity and the natural sciences for this spring 2022 semester. As I mentioned in Canvas, I thought rather than trying to manage a Zoom room of upwards of 40 or more students, it made more sense to do maybe an opening lecture series. I say series because I'm going to keep these at about 12 minutes each so that they can be transferred readily. So this will take the place of our Thursday class. I want to begin actually with some words from the New Testament from the Apostle Paul as kind of a way to begin this whole semester. This is 2 Corinthians chapter 4. So a lot of you know that the Apostle Paul actually is the most prolific author of the New Testament. That is, his writings comprise the greatest share of the New Testament. And all of his writings are letters. They're all letters either to churches or, in one case, to an individual. That'd be the little letter of Philemon. But 2 Corinthians is at least the second letter. There may have been more than two that Paul wrote to the Christian church or congregations in the city of Corinth. Excuse me, I got a little itch on my nose there. And Paul was actually the founder of this Christian community in Corinth, so he had a lot of investment in this congregation, which, by the way, and we may have opportunity to talk about this at various points during the semester, was also a very troublesome group for him. And this passage doesn't really reflect that too much, if at all. But it is always important to keep in mind that Paul had a tempestuous and somewhat contested relationship with the Corinthian Christian community. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, and we read these words. Since it is by God's mercy that we are engaged in this ministry, and the we here, by the way, would be Paul and other apostles. It's just not any old we. And even though we might read it like and place ourselves in there, it's always important to remember that this was written by a guy and he had certain people in mind. We're engaged in this ministry, and since it's by God's mercy that we do not lose heart. We have renounced the shameful things that one hides. We refuse to practice cunning or to falsify God's word. But by the open statement of the truth, we commend ourselves to the conscience of everyone in the sight of God. Verse 3. And even if our gospel or our good news is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. In their case, the God of this world, and there's no question that he would mean here Satan, the figure of Satan. This is not God as the creator of all things. In their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them, and here's where we get to the part for why I'm reading this passage. I didn't want to read it out of context. To keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. It's a really an interesting collection of prepositional phrases there. The light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. By the way, I think it will be important for our course as we proceed to know that this word translated image, very common word, of course, I-M-A-G-E. In the Greek, the word that's being translated is the word icon. And that itself, of course, is really also now an English word. In Greek, it's spelled, it looks like E-I-K-O-N, but pronounced just like our word icon, I-C-O-N. And icon, both then and now, always implies that which is visible, that which can be seen. There's another place in one of Paul's letters where Paul identifies Jesus as the icon of the invisible God. So the visible, we'll say likeness, the God made visible might be another way to put it. And he says something very similar here. He talks about the glory of Christ, who is the icon of God, the visibility of God, God made visible. Verse 5, for we do not proclaim ourselves, we proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord. And ourselves, like if we do proclaim ourselves, here's what we proclaim, ourselves as your slaves. And in the Greek, it is that very strong word, slaves. We proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord and ourselves as your slaves for Jesus' sake. For it is God who said, let light shine out of darkness. And you might recognize that as a fairly loose quotation from Genesis 1. You know, in Genesis chapter 1, at the beginning of our Bibles, we read that God said, let there be light. Here, I think in order to help fit his, we'll say his overall argument, Paul alters God's speech slightly. It is the God who said, let light shine out of darkness, who has shone, S-H-O-N-E, has shined, who has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. Another big pylon of prepositional phrases. To give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. So again, we have this idea that in some way or ways, God is made visible in Jesus, and here Paul actually talks about the face of Jesus Christ. What he has to say does not rest at all on whether or not we know what Jesus looked like, because we don't know. But I think we're confident in saying that Jesus had a face. And I think what Paul is saying is that the glory or the nature of God, it has been revealed to us or given to us in the real human existence of Jesus. Jesus had a face. Earlier in this letter, in fact, leading right up to what I've read, he talks about the face of Moses a little bit. He actually then talks about our faces, that is his face and the face of the Corinthians, and by implication our faces. And we all have one, don't we? And the idea there that the face in some way, I think, reveals the person. And of course, the humanity, including the humanity of the person. So in some way, Paul is saying something like, God's glory is made visible to us in this human person, this face. Again, we don't need to know what the face looked like. It's more the idea that there was a face, and from that face, the mouth spoke. Jesus taught things. He expressed love. He healed people, and did all kinds of things, of course. And what Paul's basically saying is, Jesus is the visible representation or revelation of, and now notice this, of the God who said in the beginning, let there be light. Let me read that to you one more time. For it is the God who said, let light shine out of darkness, who now has shown, just as God commanded light to shine out of darkness, God has shown in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. All right, what does that have to do with our class? Even if it didn't have anything to do with our class, it would be an awfully good thing to read. But of course it does. It's very significant that Paul identifies God as the one who said, "Let light shine out of darkness." I'll say again, it's clearly a beckoning back to Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and right off the bat, God says, "Let there be light." And so God is understood in the Christian faith, and this is the same, of course, for Jews and Muslims as well, and others that are related. God, when we say God, we mean the creator of all things. The way that we read it in Genesis 1, it is that God created the heavens and the earth, and very soon you'll read a very interesting commentary essay on this that I think is an extremely important one, which is why I have you read it. But the Apostles' Creed, which developed in the middle of the 2nd century of the Christian era, we're quite sure at the Church of Rome. The Apostles' Creed begins this way: I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. Very clearly an echo of Genesis 1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Perhaps even more significantly, within 2 centuries, the Nicene Creed, another early Christian creed, had developed. And that one says, we believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of all things visible and invisible. You see how as the time is moving on, Christians are thinking, we'll say, more expansively about creation. The terms heaven and earth are okay, but they go ahead and just say of all things visible, but also anything that's invisible as well. So that there's a way of trying to say anything that exists anywhere at any time is an element or an aspect of God's creation and a result of God's creative power. I'll pause there for this first section.